BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Back in 2020, I did a two-part episode on the case of Natalia Grace Barnett, a woman who was accused of participating in a very bizarre scam where they said that she was an adult pretending to be a 6-year-old child, or it was possible that Natalia was indeed 6 years old and was a Ukrainian orphan who was brought to the United States of America. And there is a new docuseries out exploring this called The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. I just finished watching it on Discovery Plus, but I was over on Google.com, and I saw that it was available on HBO Max as well. And to help us out, we're going to go over to an article from People magazine, available on People.com, written by Nicole Acosta, called Natalia Grace, accused of being a sociopath by adoptive parents, says allegations are not true. Natalia Grace was an orphan from the Ukraine, accused of pretending to be a 6-year-old, and of pretending to be a 6-year-old, meaning that she was a fully grown woman who simply appeared young. And before I say any more, I would like to remind you guys that some great ways that you can help out the channel are by hitting the like button and subscribing. You can also go through some of the links in the description box, and one of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And yes, every Monday is Zodiac Monday here on Black Box Online Radio, and every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper as well. Back to the article from People.com, which will introduce the subject, and then I'll talk about some things that were shared in the docu-series. In an exclusive clip obtained by Entertainment Tonight this week, Natalia addresses the allegations made public by Michael and Christine Barnett, an Indiana couple who claimed that Natalia has a form of dwarfism, and I'm going to butcher this, called spondyloepiphesial dwarfism, and she is a sociopath and a con artist who is actually an adult with sinister intentions. And I want to be very clear about something. That sentence might be a little bit awkwardly worded, and yes, I wasn't able to pronounce one of the terms too well, but Natalia does indeed have dwarfism, and her medical condition is not part of the allegations. That is something that I just wanted to restate. This is my side of the story, says Natalia, and I'm going to say what happened because I never got a chance to say what happened. Natalia shared in a 1-minute clip, which is a preview of what will be found in the new docu-series, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. I'm hearing all this stuff that never actually happened from Michael and Christine, Natalia continues. It's shocking and it's frustrating because that's not true, and people are believing what Christine and Michael are saying without even hearing my side. The Barnetts, who adopted Natalia from the Ukraine in 2010, believing that she was a 6-year-old orphan, claimed that she was an adult, masquerading as a child when they took her in. They alleged Natalia tried to harm them and their biological children during the 2 years that she lived with the adoptive family. Natalia was accused of trying to poison Christine's coffee and kill her by dragging her toward an electric fence. Natalia was also accused of placing clear thumbtacks on the stairs, face up, so that they would step on them. In 2012, the couple petitioned Marion County Probate Court to have her age changed from 22 to have her age legally changed to 22, changing her birth year from 2003 to 1989. The following year, Michael and Christine Barnett moved with their 3 sons to Canada without her, leaving her alone in an apartment in Lafayette, Indiana. The Barnetts, who later divorced, were charged with neglect of a dependent, and prosecutors couldn't charge the couple with neglect of a child because of Natalia's court-ordered age. And that really becomes the focus of the docu-series The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, because that's why there was a trial at all. That's why there were courtroom proceedings at all, because they wanted to be very clear that even though Natalia's age was legally changed, that she still had a real disability. She needed a walker to move around, and she was a dependent, and some other issues happened that they discussed in the documentary. At first, they put her in an apartment where she is living on the first floor, but then they found her a second floor apartment with a very high staircase. And as previously stated, she needed a walker to move around. It was very difficult for her to get up the stairs. So this is neglect and endangerment of a dependent. Accused. Those were the accusations at the time. But I think the part that people are much more curious about is, was Natalia Grace Barnett actually a scam artist, or was she indeed a 6-year-old orphan who was brought to the United States from the Ukraine? And some of the reasons why the parents began to think that she was an adult woman masquerading and pretending to be a child was they gave her a bath and she had fully developed pubic hair. That becomes the first and major claim. That's just the biggest piece of evidence that they go through throughout the entire series. And at one point, even in the documentary, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, someone says that's really the only piece of evidence they had that they just always fall back on. Like how when somebody has a single piece of evidence that helps their claim and then they're faced with contradictory evidence, they always end up going back to the initial claim. But that was definitely something that was very disturbing. I first learned about the story because of a British TV show called This Morning, which featured an interview with Michael Barnett, and he talked about his first meeting with Natalia Grace, and he said that it was very bizarre because he had never met her before, and she just walked into the room saying, "Mommy, Daddy," and he thought that that was off-putting in some way. He did not expect a child whom he had never seen before to be so warm and approaching toward them. However, he did say something very different in The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. He talked about how she addressed them as Mommy and Daddy when she walked into the room, but he didn't say that he thought there was anything bizarre about her behavior. So I don't know if there's anything to that. I'm just pointing out an inconsistency with something that I had watched in previous material. But then there are these allegations of physical abuse, as previously stated, that Natalia Grace tried to drag Christine Barnett into an electric fence. And I think that is somewhat of a mischaracterization because in the past, all of the other sources talked about how there was a claim that Natalia tried to push her into the fence, not drag her into it. And there is a very big story that is shared in the docuseries, but more or less they wanted to point out that the electric fence wasn't even on at the time, and there was just some type of family dispute that happened, and I don't even want to say too much about that because I think it's somewhat of a distraction, but people were also noting that there were lots of similarities between the story of Natalia Grace Barnett and the movie Orphan, which features Isabel Fuhrman playing a character, and you have to give away some of the spoilers. Some of this has spoilers, but I think some of it's common knowledge. Isabel Fuhrman plays a character named Esther, whose real name is Lena, and she is an adult pretending to be a child, and I'll be discussing the Orphan films, Orphan and Orphan First Kill, at the end of this episode, so please feel free to stay tuned. And I think that people zone in a lot more on those aspects, as opposed to, well, was Natalia a child, or was she an adult when she was adopted? And I'm going to confess something to you guys. I didn't know back in 2020. I didn't know the truth when I did the first episode, but I heavily suspected that there was something fraudulent going on. I heavily suspected that there was something fraudulent on the part of Natalia Grace Barnett, and all of these points that have been shared. Another one was that she ended up taking adult education classes at a center while her adoptive parents, had moved away. People like, why on earth would she be taking adult education classes if she were a child or even a teenager? And the explanation was that she was, even though they were adult education classes, they were only at the 5th grade level, and it was a way for her to obtain a GED. And we have to remember that this story became very popular in 2019 and 2020, when Natalia Grace Barnett appeared on the Dr. Phil show, and as I said previously, that Michael Barnett was also going on other talk shows, and I watched some of those interviews, and she would have been adopted in 2010, so 10 years would have gone by, and when I did the first recording, it was possible that she was only 16 years old at the time, and somebody wrote into the comments section saying that everybody's trying to cut apart and dissect her interview on the Dr. Phil program, and they're not looking at the facts. And I was like, well, how old do you think Natalia is? And she said, I think Natalia's 16. And it appears that that person was more or less onto something, that my initial suspicions were wrong, and that person's initial suspicions were right. And when she said that people are trying to cut apart her appearance on the Dr. Phil show, there was a very odd moment where Natalia gave what some people would call a suspicious side eye, where she made an awkward face and she turned her head to the side, and that just became the thumbnail for various YouTube videos where people were pointing out, oh wow, she must be some type of deviant, mischievous woman if she is going to make facial expressions like that. But Dr. Phil had his own theory about the case, and he said that he genuinely believed that Natalia Grace Barnett was a Ukrainian orphan, and that if she had spent time in the Ukrainian orphanages, records there are not very well preserved, and they're also not very well maintained, and they don't necessarily celebrate birthdays. And it's possible that Natalia Grace Barnett was indeed a child, but she wasn't aware of how old she was. She might have actually been 3 or 4 or 5 years older, meaning that she wasn't a 22-year-old woman pretending to be a 6-year-old, or in all fairness, an 18-year-old pretending to be a 6-year-old or something like that, but she might have been 9 years old or 10 years old. And one point, though, that does need to be somewhat addressed, and I have not heard this from many of the sources in the documentary, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, but this concept of how a child who is 6 years old should not have fully developed pubic hair, and they even Googled it, and they shared this is the Barnetts talking about their story in the documentary, saying that they Googled and they said that a child who is 6 years old should not have fully developed pubic hair. The youngest where a girl should have fully developed pubic hair would be 8 years old. And I don't even mean to say anything that's far out and bizarre, but as I understand, if a child has been through sexual abuse, then they will go through puberty at a much earlier age, and that they will develop those types of, developments, for lack of a better term, at an earlier age. But I'm not a medical doctor. That's just something that I've heard in the past. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. But more importantly, some of the other reasons why the parents think that Natalia was a scam artist were that she claimed to have been from the Ukraine. She never spoke Ukrainian. She never had a Ukrainian accent. They also introduced her to a woman who was from the Ukraine and supposedly from the same part of the Ukraine as Natalia, and she could not communicate with her at all. She just refused to speak to her, and she acted like she had never heard the language before. But there is a big problem with that, and that is that something that they shared in the documentary series, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, was that did not happen immediately after the adoption. That happened years after the adoption, and let's say hypothetically, if Natalia Grace were 6 years old, even if a child goes a year without speaking their native language completely, they can lose fluency in this. And I'm saying this as a former ESL teacher, because we even see this with adults sometimes who come to the United States or Canada from another country, and even if they go 1 year or 2 years, they lose complete fluency in their native language if they aren't using it regularly or they aren't speaking it at all. And this also goes to just show that I don't think there's anything suspicious about that. I mean, she may have been genuinely confused by the words she was saying, or just, you know how some people use the term getting rusty with a language, and it was just not normal to talk that way anymore. And I mean, maybe she understood, maybe she didn't. And the interpretation of that behavior from Michael Barnett, Natalia's adoptive father, was that she's caught. She's exposed. That's what he said in some of the interviews. But in the docuseries, he said that he believed that she had the ability to speak the Ukrainian language, but if she were to say anything, she would sound very accented, and her pronunciation wouldn't sound normal, meaning that she was indeed from the Ukraine. She was just an adult, and she had gone so many years without using it that it would have come across as not very authentic, or the entire theory would have been that she would have been exposed for being an adult who was pretending to be a child. But I would also like to respond to some comments that you guys left on the previous episode about Natalia Grace Barnett, even though it was from 3 years ago. It was an older black box recording. And the first one comes to us from Pamela, who says, if she is 16 years old now, in 2020, and was on her own at the age of 8 and successful at adult education classes at the age of 8, something doesn't add up. She is too articulate for someone who did not get the proper education at a young age. Okay, now, as I understand, Natalia would not have taken the adult education classes at the age of 8. That would have happened years later. And as far as being too articulate for someone who did not get the proper education at a young age, I have to disagree with that, because when you watch The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, you will hear very clearly that she makes numerous grammatical and linguistic errors when she is talking about, just talking to the interviewers and talking during the examinations. She makes lots of mistakes in her speech, and I do think it's very, very suspicious. And as I said, my initial suspicion was that she was a scam artist. I mean, you have someone who's even a young teenager taking adult education classes and not properly enrolled in school. I would be suspicious as well. And I should confess, I don't know too much about her schooling outside of these adult education classes, but as the explanation that has been provided is that she was trying to get a GED. She is an adult. I do not believe she is 30 years old, but she is an adult. She has also set up her own YouTube account in 2014, which, if she was 8 at the time and they left her alone, when she set it up, she would have been 10 years old. That is not adding up. Yes, we have to remember Natalia was born in 2003, and that she would have been 10, turning 11 years old in 2014. And I mean, an 11-year-old having a YouTube account, I don't think that is too bizarre. An 11-year-old living on her own, and to be clear, Natalia did have other people helping her. There was even a family that more or less took her in, and some I should say controversial things happened with that family, which you can see in the documentary, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. But as far as Pamelas Theory, she seems to be completely in line with Dr. Phil about how Natalia was older than she thought. However, and this is a big however, this docu-series, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, really wanted to find answers. And that's not simply the documentarians. It's not simply the filmmakers and the TV producers. There was a real trial going on. They were trying to find out, should the parents, Michael and Christine Barnett, be found guilty of the neglect of a dependent, and they obtained Natalia's birth certificate, which stated that she was born in the Ukraine, and she was born in 2003, meaning that she would have indeed been 6 years old at the time of the adoption. They also contacted her birth mother multiple times. They did a DNA test on her birth mother, and it turned out that they were a 99.99% match, meaning she was indeed Natalia's birth mother. And if she had been born in 1989, that would have meant that her mother was 10 years old when she gave birth to her. The mother was born in 1979, so that also is something inconsistent. And when they talked to her in 2020, she said she had been dealing with Natasha, as she called her, for 17 years, also meaning that she had been born in 2003. All of these factors came together and suggested that she was indeed a child when she was adopted. And as I said, I mean, that goes against my initial suspicion. I thought there were all of these odd things happening, and that this woman had just been lying and deceiving people. But it appears that there actually was a very strong set of pieces of evidence that a strong set of evidence that indicated that Natalia was indeed 6 years old at the time of the adoption, even though it is a wild story. And there was also a doctor that was interviewed for this by the lawyers, and his testimony was shared in the docuseries The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, and he said that at the time of his examinations, her body was still growing, and she still had the growth plates, I believe was the exact term, the growth plates of a child, whereas a fully grown adult would not have those. So all of that evidence suggests that she was indeed a child, and I mean, I am still somewhat shocked about that, but I mean, the facts are the facts, I suppose. And we have a comment from Dawn Smith that says, in 2014, she was 11 years old and her older sister helped her set up her channel, which if you watched clearly, you'd see that she was a child. Not sure how you determined that she was successful at adult education, seeing as how she didn't get her GED. And that's a comment that is going toward somebody else, but I don't, I agree with that comment. As I said very clearly, I don't have much information on her education other than she tried to get a GED, and that's about it. And as I said, though, she does make lots of linguistic mistakes in her language. The next comment comes to us from Nicole, who says, you don't need Barnetts or the doctors to tell you that Natalia is an adult. You can see it, you can hear it. No one has ever accused a child of being an adult unless they were. I would have agreed with you, except for the fact that, there's a lot of hard evidence that is pointing in a different way. And there's another comment from Ariane who says, she is not an adult, go watch her YouTube channel. And I don't know how convincing would be to watch a YouTube channel and just find hard pieces of evidence. I think the stuff like DNA, birth certificates, the interviews with her biological mother, as well as the testimonies from the doctors talking about her age, that stuff I think is hard evidence. Dawn Smith has another comment. The Barnetts have accused a child of being an adult and she was not an adult. This is why they got arrested, not Natalia, charged with 6 felonies and facing 20 years. Now, that is not exactly true. As we've said previously, they were charged with the abandonment and neglect of a dependent. They were unable to be charged with the abandonment and neglect of a child because Natalia's age was legally changed. And in the curious case of Natalia Grace, the explanation that had been provided for that was that Michael Barnett said that she had not grown in 4 years, and a judge had determined that you stop growing when you're 18 years old, so he added 4 years onto that, and that she was then re-aged to have been 22. Now, was she actually 22 years old? I think all of the evidence suggests otherwise. But what do you think about this particular story? What do you think about the curious case of Natalia Grace? Do you believe that Natalia was an adult pretending to be a little girl, or do you believe she was indeed an orphan from the Ukraine? Now, I want to share one final note, because there is one last comment that I would like to respond to in this episode, and it is from QOP13. This still doesn't explain why she has no accent and why the family did not return her. As previously stated about the accent, children can learn those things very quickly. Even some people in their teenage years and early 20s can learn a native accent, and it doesn't happen as frequently with that age group, but as someone who has dealt with this rather frequently, I believe that perhaps they did not hear her talking in the Ukrainian language simply because they don't speak the Ukrainian language. And sometimes people will do this, especially children. If they don't expect that other people will understand them, then they just will not use it. And over time, like, her ability to use the Ukrainian language or the Russian language would have faded out, and then she would have just used English as a dominant language. That happens very frequently with people who are in these adoptive settings. And also, this whole concept of how she didn't want the parents to hear her talking with an accent. Even if she had remembered the Ukrainian language 2 years after, when she met this other person to talk to her in it, that would have been totally normal for her to have an accent. We have all types of people coming to America. Think of celebrities like actors and musicians who then they spend 20, 30, 40 years in America, and then they do an interview in their native language, and people are all like, hey, wait a second, this person has definitely had English affect their native tongue. This happens with Arnold Schwarzenegger or Lars Ulrich. You'll see people saying this stuff in the comment section. Any person who comes from another country and people are pointing out that English has affected their native language, and especially with a kid, I also don't think that that is going to be anything that is out of the ordinary. And we have to remember that point. Just they didn't hear her talking in Ukrainian because it wasn't practical for her to do that. Like, we're talking about instincts. We're talking about very basic natural elements of the brain where someone is just thinking, I'm not going to talk to them in Ukrainian because they won't understand it. And over time, her ability to do so became less and less until maybe it was completely phased out altogether. But that's just my take on the subject. As I said, I want to know what you guys think. You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. And I said that I would talk to you guys a little bit about the movie Orphan, as well as the prequel Orphan First Kill. So a lot of people were saying that there are similarities between this story and the movie Orphan, and it tells the story of a girl named Lena who changes her name to Esther, and they're trying to find out what's wrong with Esther. And back in 2008 and 2009, where they were doing the publicity for this movie, somebody told me that he thought he knew what was wrong with her. He had heard a story about a girl as a kid, some type of horror story, where Esther wears this collar or choker around her neck, and if the choker were removed, her head would fall off. I mean, going in something really horrific and paranormal. However, that of course is not the case. The secret is that Esther is actually a 33-year-old woman pretending to be a little girl because she has a hormonal and aging disorder, and she appears young even though she is old. And they also made some efforts with the movie Orphan to show that Esther, or Lena, is actually going through a transformative process. She even uses certain things to alter her appearance to make her look even younger. Now, this is the first movie that I ever watched via YouTube clips. I was watching stuff about Natalia Grace Barnett, and I tried to watch a makeshift uploaded potato copy of the movie Orphan, and the audio was so rough on YouTube I couldn't really get through it. So I decided to just watch little clips of the movie out of order, and I actually made it through the entire film just watching this type of discombobulated array of elements from the story. But I did get to everything, and I was very surprised that there was going to be a prequel, and I'm not going to spoil everything for you, but I mean that I was very surprised they made a prequel called Orphan First Kill, but I was even more shocked that the same actress plays Esther Lena in Orphan and Orphan First Kill. I thought that it was a look-alike, and then I was shocked to see Isabel Fuhrman's name in the credits because they really went through a very, very strong process and a very creative and thoughtful process to make her look younger. And there are actually two body doubles that play her in Orphan First Kill, the prequel, and then they went through a lot of makeup and a lot of design issues to really try and make her look like a 10-year-old girl, but it seems rather seamless, and I really have to give credit to them for that. Orphan First Kill was a fairly entertaining movie because it had this element where Lena is not only the villain, and she's also someone that you can be on her side, and she's not just someone who is very angry and that you just want to see experiencing some type of punishment. You get to see a little bit more of her humanity. And if they are going to make a second one, I hear that they're going to make a third film. And this is what horror films just have to have. They have to have a trilogy to enter into the world of horror elites. I don't know why. There's this human connection to the number 3 and the human connection to the number 7. I mean, whether it's Trinity, trilogy, and with 7, it's lucky number 7, the 7 wonders of the world. I don't know if it's something about odd numbers, prime numbers, but people just have this connection to the number 3 and the number 7. And I really hope they do make a third film. And as they've shown, Isabel Fuhrman is capable of looking younger on screen. And those movies are somewhat entertaining, but it really comes from this whole concept of an adult woman is pretending to be a child, and she has a lot of psychological issues when she's just trying to abuse people, and she has moments of rage. And that actually is one of the explanations for the choker around her neck. As I said, I don't like to give away movie spoilers, but oh yeah, but I will tell you one. Did you know that Bruce Willis was dead in The Sixth Sense and he didn't know it? Okay, see, sometimes it's just commonplace. It's common knowledge, and it just gets accepted into normal discussions throughout our daily lives. But those movies are entertaining, and when you hear a story like Natalia Grace Barnett, absolutely not entertaining to think that this person could actually be a 22-year-old pretending to be a 6-year-old and just trying to murder the family. But one final ending note is that this was not directly stated in the docuseries The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, but their implication was very strong, and that is that the adoptive mother, Christine Barnett, was the one who was abusive, that it wasn't Natalia, that it was Christine who was the person creating these situations of psychological and emotional abuse, and her husband, Michael Barnett, became, well, a victim or pulled into her web of twisted behaviors, and then that affected the children. Now, he doesn't come across as someone who was completely innocent or scot-free. He definitely was an adult, and he had the ability to make his own choices, but it appears that their, again, implication was that she was the epicenter of it all, not Natalia, not these two innocent people who tried to do something nice and adopt an orphan from the Ukraine, but then she just turned out to be a sociopath who tried to kill them. Instead, it was, their implication was that the adoptive mother was the person creating the destructive behavior from the start. But I'd love to know what you guys think, and once again, you can watch the docu-series for yourself, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. You can also listen to the old Black Box recording here on BBOR. One more time, hit the like button, subscribe, visit BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxOnlineRadio, and there's always the book, Killer on a White Horse. Lots of things in the description box. And that will be all for me now. So I will see you over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.